Back to the idea of medicinal things and all that. And by the way, why do we even care about bitters? Because it's the foundation of who and what we are. I mean, that old definition from the Bounce and Columbian Repository, that newspaper in Hudson, New York, in 1806. A letter to the editor on May 6th was answered on May 13th. What is this thing called cocktail? Because ironically, you were allowed to ply your voters in those days with as much alcohol as you wanted. That wasn't illegal. Right until they voted, right outside where they voted, it was okay. And most politicians, George Washington spent something like $2,000 on his campaign for presidency. And not that he needed to, but the only addendum to that was that you had to publish somewhere publicly what you spent and what particular form of alcohol you spent it on in your different campaigns. So this guy wrote down Madeira, beer, Neiman, and cocktail, $25. And some old guy writes a letter and says, what is this thing called? And this was the answer. It was funny and there was a lot more that went to it, but the definition that was printed in that May 13th edition of the paper was strong spirits of any kind, sugar, water, and bitters, also known as a bittered sling. A bittered sling. What was a sling? A sling was a poor man's punch. Why? Because it was missing the citrus and it was missing the spice. Because we couldn't afford that kind of stuff over here in Hollywood. We were the poor idiots, you know. Everything came from England. But when we discovered bitters, this was spice in a bottle, and much cheaper than having to have the actual spices themselves, which were terribly expensive. This is a story of Nathaniel Nutmeg. This is a story of nutmeg in Southeast Asia. I'll pass this around and leave it by the bar when you don't walk out with it. But it tells the whole story. This is a spice that was so rare that when the ships came back from Southeast Asia with loads and bags of nutmeg berries, if a sailor could manage to get off the ship with about 12 or 15 nutmeg berries in a little pouch somewhere, he could probably retire and build a house. That's how expensive this stuff was and how dear. So that's what I'm talking about. The sling was just a poor man's punch, but here we are, a bittered sling, giving the punch ingredients, putting them back in, and serving it as a single, instead of a bowl, as a single drink. So also known as a bittered sling was how this definition went up. But cocktail was the word to describe it, and it just meant that they added bitters to their punches and their slings and the stuff that they already had. We all know now that that's become an outmoded definition. There's a lot more to it than that. Stoughton's bitters, you think, well, it's got to be an American product because it's the foundation of the American cocktail. It must have been an American product. It wasn't. Dr. Stoughton invented it back in 1690 and he patented it in 1712. It was the second ever patent medicine in the UK. And I once asked David Wondrich, our historical oracle, if he knew what the first patent medicine was. He was pissed because he didn't. But he will. He will. David is an incredible research person. Also a friend and a business partner, and he'll find out. So here we are, Stoughton, and this is not Stoughton's bitters because Stoughton's bitters have 22 botanicals immersed in high-proof alcohol. This is obviously not the recipe. But again, what's at the top? Gentian root. Gentian root, look right below it, because now we're getting into some of the history of the ingredients that went into these bitters. Red Saunders wood is a dye wood. It's a wood that when you soak it, it creates a dye. In this case, a red dye. It was used in this bitters, but cochineal would have been the go-to. But cochineal was very dear. Cochineal was something that came from eating that stuff. Why are these animals eating this stuff? And what does this stuff taste like? So they started experimenting. And, eventually there started to be, people started to write these things down. And one of the first places in modern times, I say modern times, we're talking 1500 BC, modern times compared to the hunter-gatherer, there was something called the Eber Papyrus where they did write down a lot of this, which most scholars believe was a much later version of probably a Phoenician or even older document that's been lost to history. So this papyrus, this Eber Papyrus, in 1st century, via Valencia and brought to the islands, the Lesser Antilles, and they planted them there. It was such a harsh climate, hot and dry, that the plants protected themselves over generations, and they sent their oil to the skins, and the inside got much less juicy, but the outside got full of oil. So they were bitter but very rich in oil on the skins, and that's what we ended up using. A lot of these products, think about it, they came from the old world, they came from the new world back to the old world. They put them together in these compound beverages like vermouth and water and all those other, and they sent them back to the new world again, and we used them in our cocktails. It was like an important collaboration that went on there. This we don't use anymore. It's flat out poisonous. Carol was used. Sweet flag was used for people who couldn't afford baking spices like nutmeg and cinnamon and stuff like that, because sweet flag gave some of those aromas also. Nature continually is playing games with us. We'll find these chemicals in plants where you don't expect to find them. Guinea pepper is a great story. It's West Africa, in the area where the great apes were. And as a matter of fact, when the great apes were dying in zoos in the early days when they were bringing them back to zoos, they couldn't figure out how to keep them alive. They thought they were feeding them what they should get, but it turns out that they weren't. 70% of their diet was this stuff. And they were dying of heart disease a lot. So as soon as they started adding guinea pepper to their diets, they lived in the museums and they prospered because that was in their diet. So again, we're back to this medicinal thing. This worked, and you know the great apes are getting a lot closer to us than you imagine in anatomy. So you know maybe this is something that would probably help us. And so that's how medicine proceeds. But they're also called grains of paradise. American saffron, I'm not sure how related to regular saffron that is, but I don't think it's really much around anymore. Cinnamon, clove, and nutmeg. Let's go to number 4. Because now we're into clove, and mine is clove. And now we're into nutmeg, and we're into allspice. And mine is all those. By the way, where did it come from? Why do I call it pimento? Because the Spaniards, when they arrived in South America, they saw the Indians grinding up these blackberries. They thought they were peppercorns. They called them pimento granulates. That stuck in the Spanish-speaking world. But when John Ray came over in the 1690s and started sending stuff back to London, and he got back to his laboratory and started dealing with it, when he got to the allspice berries, he said, "Oh my God, it's got all kinds of aromas. This is like allspice." And that's stuck in the English language. So let's taste. What does it smell like? Don't taste it. Don't taste it. No, because this is going to kill your palate. Wait. Nose it. Nose it. What do we got?
Is it cardamom?
Allspice. What does that mean, allspice? Clove, right? It means nutmeg. It means what else? Celery. But what else? What's close to what we smelled in the last one? But this time it's not that sweet.
Cardamom?
This time it's like fennel, isn't it?
Fennel.
It's green. That's the difference. Go back and smell 3. That's licorice. This is fennel. This is anethol. It's a totally different presentation of anethol because it has all these green parts to it. You know. Let's taste it and just a tiny little bit. Yeah. You just found your dry banana. It is brutally dry. And actually, it has demerara sugar in it, but very, very little. Just to soften it slightly. But this, when you see it, put some in your hand, please don't forget. This you're going to see, it's going to blow your mind when you get these Manhattans. It just blow your mind. Well, here are the allspice berries. Allspice was an interesting story. They couldn't get the goddamn things to germinate out of South America. They brought the seeds back here and there. They couldn't get them to grow anyway, under any circumstance, until they figured out that the seed had to pass through the body of a bat or a bird before it would germinate. So when they figured out how to artificially do that, then they could grow it anyway. And the Dutch did, and they grew allspice. What do you call it? Orchard? I guess orchards. I don't know what would be the name for it in Southeast Asia. And actually, the Dutch were really clever. They ended up with a monopoly on nutmeg, and a monopoly on cinnamon, and a monopoly on clove. They were just really, really good at this stuff. They were brutal. And you'll find out how brutal they were in that nutmeg. But they also had a monopoly on quinine, which was called fever bark in Peru, where it originated. Pass that around. This is a book all about the history of quinine and how important it was to civilization. We think of civilization as being the things that attack civilization, like the bubonic plague and the smallpox. But no, the most vicious of all the diseases, from the beginning of time, from the caveman times, because it was so ubiquitous, was malaria. Mosquitoes. All you needed was water and mosquitoes, so it was everywhere. It was in Rome. Rome used to be, sure, it's 7 big hills, but you know what was around those hills? It was all swamp. They drained all those swamps, but before they drained them, the Catholic Church hated it when a pope died in the summer. Because if a pope died in the summer, because nobody stayed in Rome in the summer, they all went to the hills. In the summertime, if you brought all of those cardinals back from around the world to vote for the new pope, as a matter of fact, it happened during the Medici years. When they elected the new pope, 1/3 of the cardinals died of malaria before they ever even left Rome. The pope they elected died within 3 weeks of being elected pope, and they had to start all over again. This was vicious. And it was the Jesuits who, in Peru, in the forests of Peru, saw this fever bug. The Jesuits they were the smartest guys on the block. I mean, you know, these were like, if, you know, I made this illusion yesterday that they were like the city-states of Italy were really the clearinghouse for all the technology from the Far East, like distilling, for example, but lots of other stuff too. Why? Because the monasteries were a lot of caches of ancient knowledge were stored during the Dark Ages, you know. But they finally turned the light on during Enlightenment, and these were the guys that had the goods. So if the hedge fund managers were the city-states, these guys were their expediters, if you will. So here these guys are in the middle. They're there as ostensibly to bring Christianity to the Indians, but they're also watching and seeing. They're sending these fever bugs back, and it works. It works. They didn't know particularly what fever they were using on, but it worked against malaria. Cinchona, and Cinchona pubescens was a particular kind of tree that had the highest quinine content. And the Dutch ended up having a monopoly on this stuff. And this is a wonderful story you'll find in this book when you pass it around. Anybody know Amy Stewart's books? Oh my God, she's wonderful. I started reading her with Wicked Bugs and Wicked Plants. If you ever want to poison your spouse and not get caught with wicked plants, that's where you want to go. Anyway, you'll enjoy this book. It's called The Drunken Botanist. It's every plant that was ever used in a booze setting at all. And in there is where you see the story of quinine and how at the end of the First World War, the Dutch still pretty much had all of the processed quinine in the world, and most of it was in warehouses down there in what was the islands? The Banda Islands in Jakarta and those places like that, and the rest of it was up in Amsterdam in warehouses. And guess what happened with the Axis powers in the first years there? Because it's a fixative. It's a fixative. In other words, after 2 years of oxidizing the root, just leaving it out exposed to the air, it changes chemically inside and it becomes a fixative. In other words, when you add other stuff to it that has, like juniper berries, with all their aroma, it fixes that. So that when you open the bottle 2 years later, it still smells like juniper. That's what Oris does. And that's why it's in a lot of stuff. Okay, now I think we begin with Manhattans because we're running out of time. I don't know when I'm supposed to get on there. Is it an hour and a half? Oh, good, so I got time. The Manhattan, and this is fun. We'll do this as we taste our Manhattans. Let's pick up Manhattan, how dark Manhattan number 1 is. Swirl it around a little bit just to get all mixed up. Can you get those baking spices, that Christmas tree? Yeah, you can. What else you smell in there? By the way, you have little rye berries if you want to chew on one. I didn't get any up here. I'm going to chew on one. These are little rye. We're drinking Manhattans that were made with not Greek rye. Okay, let's do parts. 8 parts, 3 parts, 2 parts. So it's an imperfect, perfect Manhattan.